What's going up, everybody? It's Teeny the Grey back for another video, and today we are painting a hen. I got commissioned to paint a hen by this lady I know, so that's what we're doing today. Real quick, I'll go through the supplies that I'm using. I'm using an 8x10 store-bought canvas because that's what I had on hand. I'm using some Plaza Art Studio acrylic paints, which is just the house brand of this art store. They're basically comparable to the Liquitex Basics, so nothing fancy there. I'm using two Filbert natural bristle brushes. One's pretty big for the background, which I'm using right now, and a medium size for the body of the hen. And later I go on with a thinner brush for the details on the face. And just my glass palette right there made out of a picture frame glass. But right now I'm just painting the background on the canvas. I'm using some blues and whites and a little bit of red just to give it some interest. I'm not mixing the colors too much. There's some spots that are more white and some spots that are more blue just to give it a little bit of texture and a little bit more interest. I actually was commissioned to paint a rooster by the same lady a few months ago, and the background was a little bit yellow and green, so I wanted something to contrast that. And I'm using only the primary colors and black and white. I find it a lot better when I'm working in acrylics to mix my own colors. There's not really a need to buy a whole bunch of colors. I mean, some things are convenience colors. I do have some green and some other colors, like one or two other colors, but for the most part, I just like to mix my own. So I'm really not an animal painter. I've actually only done like 3 animals, I believe. So I don't have a lot of experience going into this. The main thing I was trying to pay attention to was just the colors. So the main body of the hen, there was towards the tail feathers, it was a little bit more white, and towards the neck it was a darker brown. The head had a little bit more of a warmer tone, more kind of red brown. The wing was a little bit darker, and then the tail feathers themselves were pretty much black. So that's what I try to pay attention to going into this. And really, this whole painting was pretty much an experiment, but I'm pretty happy with how it turned out, and the client liked it as well, so that's pretty good. But I'm just trying to keep in mind the lighter values and the darker values. And also, like I said, for the background, for the body of the hen, I'm really not mixing my colors that much. So I'll mix up a color on the palette, but just not let it be a flat color. So then on the canvas, you get some different colors coming out with the brush strokes. So I'm not going in and outlining every single feather. I think that would look cartoony. So I'm just letting the shape of my brush really define the shape of the feathers, and getting my brush loaded up with different colors, some white, some brown, some black, whatever, and just dabbing it on and letting that kind of be the shape of the feathers. So I'm just hinting towards feathers. I'm not outlining and painting every single feather. And for the tails right there, the tail feathers, they're pretty much black. In the reference photo, yeah, they're just completely black. But I find it kind of jarring to just put straight up black on a canvas. When I'm trying to paint something like this, you know, there are times when black is fine. So all I did was mix it with a little bit of brown just to kind of tone it back a little bit so it's not quite such a deep black. And compared to all the other colors in the final painting, it looks black, but it's just not quite so jarring, I believe. And I'm fading that into some darker brown and then some lighter white browns as well. And I'm just trying to, like I said, pay attention to the flat color. I'm not going in with too much detail now, but one thing I am trying to pay attention to is the contrast. So I'm trying to mix in some white in the darker areas, and then some darker browns in the white areas, and just build up some contrast, because that's what makes things look a little bit more realistic. Like I said, I don't have too much experience going into this, but I really did just try to pay attention to the contrast. So later on you'll see I put some black down at the end of the feathers, and then I'll go in the same spot and paint some white. And I think it turned out pretty good in the end. Right now I'm working on the neck. There's some black kind of feathers and some white ones. And I started going in and it looked really speckly, so right there, yeah, I just painted over it. I didn't like it. It didn't look like the reference photo. In the reference photo, it looked more like lines, so that's what you can see me doing right there. I put in a few lines because before I think I overdid it. But that's the cool thing about acrylics, you could just paint over it because everything's really opaque. And later I go back in that same area and put some white and some lighter browns. But here I'm just adding some black to the end of the feathers because that's how the reference photo is. The tips of the feathers are black. So I'm adding that, and then I go back in later and add more details where I add some white next to that to really make it pop. And yeah, I pretty much do this in 2 layers. I do all this right now is in 1 layer, so I'm just layering on top of one another. Well, I clean my brush like once or twice to get that black out of it, but pretty much just the flat colors and then some hints of some other shades. I know my hand is kind of covering the painting in the face right now, but don't worry, I do go back in with a close-up shot and paint the face where you all can see it, but all I'm doing right now is laying in the base color, which is a warmer tone. I put some more red in it, and that's all I'm doing in the face, so you're really not missing much, and I'll go back in with the close-up shot of me actually painting the details in the face. And the only other thing I do, I think, in this layer is the feet, the chicken legs, the chicken feet, whatever, and I really hated them. They're quite fat to begin with when I painted them, and you'll see I struggle with that. But yeah, one thing I just wanted to do in this painting is to build up texture and to experiment. I didn't take this too seriously. I really had fun this whole time, and I did it quickly. I didn't fuss over little details too much. I really just put different colors on my brush and dab that on the canvas no matter what section of the painting I was working on. So you get a lot of different variations of colors, and when you let the paint blend on the canvas as opposed to mixing it completely on your palette and then painting, you get really nice streaks and sections where the different colors come out, and I really like how that looks. I think it looks pretty natural. Yeah, this isn't a photorealistic hen by any means, but I think mixing on the canvas as opposed to the palette does look more realistic. So you can see I'm really struggling with these chicken legs. They're actually really way too fat, and I kind of realized that, and I tried to go back in with the background and paint over it, but I needed to let it dry, so I do stop and I let it dry for a minute. That's where I'm at. The feet are looking pretty fucked up right now. They're definitely way too big. But I'm gonna let this dry, and then I'm gonna go back and fix the legs and the feet, add in the face. The body turned out pretty good. I'm not like an acrylic painter, and I don't do animals. Like, the only time I've ever painted animals is when someone has paid me to do it. So yeah, I got this commission for a hen. It's going well. I'm really happy with how the body turned out. Like, there's that reference photo. I don't know if you could see it right there, but I'm pretty happy so far. I'm gonna let this dry and then come back and finish up the legs and the face. So this is me putting in the details of the face. I kept this real time for the most part. I did cut out the sections where I was mixing a new color or cleaning off my brush, but as far as putting paint on canvas, you're seeing everything real time. And I wanted to do that, like, for one thing, just to change up the speed a little bit, but also to give you guys a little bit of context of how fast I'm painting. I painted this pretty quickly. This whole painting probably took maybe 2 to 2.5 hours, and that was including drying times. So yeah, I think it's pretty easy to get overwhelmed with details. So for the face, I was really overwhelmed. I didn't know what to do, and I just wanted to keep it simple. So I put in a little bit of yellow on the beak, and I thought it was too bright, so I went in with a darker color, and that kind of felt a little bit too dark, so I went in with a lighter brown, and still it was a darker tone, but it wasn't quite as dark. And this I'm just doing to add some structure to the face. So you can see right there that darker tone, and then later I go back in with a lighter tone, but I'm just building up layers. And I introduced that new brown, so now I'm putting some feathers in just to make the whole painting a little bit more cohesive. In the reference photo, there's more tones of brown than I can even count. There's tons of different types of brown. So I'm just trying to add that in there to the rest of the body. So I added it to the face, and then I'm just adding some little feathers. Like, I'm not getting too concerned with the shape of anything. I'm just kind of dabbing it in there and having fun with it. And there's a little bit of a lighter section, so I go in and paint that in, and then go back in with some more brown, and I'm just building up layers. This whole painting is just building up layers. And there's a little bit of pink around the eye, so I added that in just to make it look like it's not a flat eye. And with that red color, I go back in on the red parts of the chicken, I'm not sure what it's called, and I just add that in. So like I said, just building in layers, adding one color after another, and not getting too fussy with the shape of anything. I feel like I like this painting. Like I said, it's not the most realistic thing in the world, but I really like how it came out, and I wasn't fussing and worrying about the shape of my strokes or um, drawing feathers or drawing a picture perfect chicken face. I was just really letting the paintbrush kind of determine the shape, and I was just building up texture and layers, and I think that's how it came out pretty well. So I added just a little bit of highlight on the eye and the beak there, and then I go in on the red parts, and I decided that was too white, so I went in with some pink and kind of blended that out. But yeah, so that's pretty much the face completed there in just a few minutes. It's really how quick it was. So I just wanted to keep things simple and work in different layers. So I'm going back in with the background color and trying to fix these legs. Basically, they were too fat, so I'm going back in with the background and painting over the legs to make them thinner. The only problem with that was I let the background have variations in colors, so I couldn't just paint it flat blue, because then that would stand out. So I had to go back in with different whites and blues and kind of try to mimic the texture that I initially started out with. And I think in the end it turned out pretty well. Just trying to keep that texture going. And I do go back in later and add a little bit more detail to the legs, but pretty much in the second layer. So that was the first layer and everything dried. So the second layer, I'm fixing the legs, fixing the face, and adding some few final details. The second layer really didn't take that much work. I did notice that where the legs connect to the body, it looked kind of silly. So I added some dark feathers there, just trying to pay attention again to the values in the reference photo, so it doesn't look like the legs are just taped on. They actually look like they're a part of the body. And again, I'm paying attention to contrast. So in the white of the tail feathers, I add a little bit of dark brown, and I add some darker values to the edges of the chicken to make it look round and to give it dimension, so it doesn't look just flat painted on the blue background. I just wanted to make the edges darker and kind of blend it out so it looks round, just giving it more dimension. And anytime there's some darker feather sections, I add some lighter hues, and anytime there's lighter portions, I put some dark feathers, because that contrast really makes the lights and darks pop. That's why, like, later on I go into the dark tail feathers and I add some white to kind of distinguish that. And here I'm adding some white next to the black to make everything pop and to give more dimension. So again, I'm not outlining the feathers, but I'm just trying to pay attention to lights and darks and to the values. And I think in the end it worked. Just trying to hint at the shape of the tail feathers. And I'm going back in with some more blue to kind of cover up my initial pencil sketch. I could see some of that coming through, so I wanted to paint over that to clean it up a little bit. And yeah, other than that, that's pretty much it. I do add some horizontal lines to the legs and some darker shades, and I think that really brought it together. It made it look a lot more realistic, and I think they turned out way better than they did when I initially painted them. But yeah, just that's pretty much it. This video is coming to the end there. I'm adding some lighter values into the tail feathers, like I said, to distinguish the feathers from one another so it doesn't look like just a black blob, and add some more interest. But that's pretty much it. That is my finished chicken. I like how it turned out, the client liked how it turned out, and I had a lot of fun making it. So I hope you enjoy, and if you want to commission me to do anything, I'll leave my Instagram at the end of this and in the description below. But yeah, hope you enjoyed, and I hope you guys go create. See you guys.